All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. If you have been paying attention, you will notice that was the Unparsed tune here. And if you were at Unparsed, thank you so much for coming to Unparsed. I know you're probably here sick and tired of me banging on about Unparsed by now, because that's all I've been talking about for the last 6 months or so at the beginning of every single podcast. Oh, come to Unparsed. Oh, it's going to be fantastic. Well, if you did come, you will know that it was fantastic. It was absolutely brilliant. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you to all of our speakers and everything like that. It was absolutely brilliant. We had nearly 300 people at the Museum of London, and it was just absolutely epic. Absolutely epic. But I won't bang on about it anymore. You can go to the website unparsedconf.com if you want to watch them back or whatever. And one of those speakers was Falene McKenna, who's joining me today, and was our lucky winner in our kind of like, we did some sort of like little raffle type thing where we kind of, I don't know, we spun a wheel. What happened is people at the conference were putting people onto the wheel that we had, people who are inspirational, people who they've learned a lot from, people who are community builders and all that kind of stuff. And we spun the wheel and we said, whoever's name comes up, we'll do a podcast with after the conference. And Falene, your name come up, and so you are here. So thank you.
Really quite exciting. Finally, I'm on the VUX podcast.
Finally, I know it's took far too long. Absolutely far too long. I don't know if you can see this from where you are, but I am wearing the most recent pin that you gave me.
You are.
I do have the other one. It is on my shelf there, Gilgamesh. I've got that one, but this is the more recent one, so I thought I'd wear that in homage to Unparsed and to your excellent merch that you tend to give out.
I do appreciate that. Next Unparsed next year, please be aware there will be a new one. So.
Oh, well, there you go. Collect the whole set. If I can collect the whole set, then that's what I'm all about. What I think I should do is I think I need a cap, a bit like this, but maybe like a different type of cap. And I put all the pins on all the caps. And we just have one cap which is all full of everyone's pins, because Corbus gave me a South Africa one. I've got 2 from you. I've got another one from somebody else. So yeah, I think that's the start of the next collection.
It's an exciting new adventure. I personally prefer them to QR codes because not QR codes, business cards.
Yes.
Because this way people remember it.
Exactly, yeah. And everyone's got far too many business cards, and they only throw them out afterwards anyway because they've got you on LinkedIn and they'll find you. So, Falene, welcome to the podcast. I want to read, for those people that don't know Falene McKenna, I did something as a bit of an experiment earlier on, and I asked ChatGPT, who is Falene McKenna? Because I wanted to see whether or not it how clever is it? And I thought to myself, well, it's probably going to be, a bit of an old description. Maybe it won't necessarily be accurate. But I'm going to read this, and you tell me a mark out of 10. Yeah?
Okay.
All right. So, Falene McKenna is a notable figure in the field of computational linguistics and conversational AI. She is the founder of Lingua Robotica and is recognized for her expertise in building and designing conversational AI systems. First point of note there, your company is not 2 years old, is it not?
No. I started my company October 6th.
Right, so it's got some new information here. With a background in computational linguistics from the University of Alberta, is that correct? It is. Well, it's come back now, I think. There you go, yeah. That's Zoom being funny. It's selected my microphone. So was that correct?
Yes, I went to the University of Alberta, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the University of Regina / First Nations University of Canada.
Wow. All right, yeah. There you go. So tick. So a background in numerous projects, including QA Crusades and the expansion of beta programs across North American homes.
Yes, with Intuition Robotics.
Intuition Robotics, fantastic. McKenna is often described as a conversation wizard. I can tell you that one's true. And a true robot whisperer, also true. Reflecting her ability to craft engaging and effective conferences such as the Conversation Design Festival and the Unparsed Conversational AI Conference.
Also all true.
Can you believe that? It's picked up Unparsed. I can't believe that. I don't know where it's got that from.
Yeah. And you didn't prompt it at all. No system prompt saying, mention unparsed?
I honestly didn't give it any prompts. I said, I'm having Falene McKenna on the podcast. Can you give me a bit of a description about her? And that's basically what it come back with. Simple as that.
This is amazing, and I appreciate the intro from AI, because I remember in, let's say, 3 months after ChatGPT came out, it said that I worked at Samsung and Verizon and a whole bunch of places that I've never worked. So this is really exciting.
There you go. So apparently the sources are Careercast.
Yes, Linguistics Careercast. It's a podcast that talks about linguistics and how we enter into the field of anything outside of academia from linguistics.
Right, fair enough then. There you go. Fantastic. That's good. It goes on, but I think we can pretty much say that it's fair. It's accurate enough. Anything missing from that, from people who don't know who you are, Falene? Anything that you would add to ChatGPT's introduction of you?
Well, if you know me, you have probably heard me talk about my dog Gilgamesh. So there's that.
Of course.
It missed that very big part of my life. It missed that I've also worked as a developer at Intuition Robotics. I was a conversational AI designer and developer, but the developer was my role. And at Curiosity Robotics, which was my company before I started my own company, we created a robot to help children learn English from a young age, about age 2. And so that was my third robotics company. And then I decided, since I know so much about it and I love it so much and I know how much impact it can have, why not start my own? And so I did.
Right. So the Lingua Robotics is it a company that is intended to build robots, or is it you offering your services to companies that build robots?
So there's 2 branches of this. The main branch is building the robot. Lingua Robotica is creating a robot that can sit with individuals in hospitals to be there where humans cannot be. Because let's be honest, your loved one ends up in a hospital, you still have to go on with your life. You have to work your job. You have to do your social commitments. If you have children, you have to be with them. So who's there with them? Not the nurses, because I love nurses, but they have to deal with so many patients. And not the doctors. I love the doctors, but they always come at midnight and I don't know why. So who's there at 3 a.m. when they wake up? No one. So we are designing, and by we I mean I, because it's a one-man team right now, a robot that when they're going through painful procedures, when they wake up at 3 a.m. and feel like there's no hope, everything is awful, why are they so sick? It's just terrible. And they reach out to grab your hand, but you can't be there. So they reach out, and my robot reaches back and it squeezes their hand and it says, it's okay. It's okay to feel these things. And on top of all of the wonderful things that it can have from just that physical presence, it also has the ability to have basic conversations, to save time, this is a bad time to lose my words. Save reminders that you want to ask the doctor about. It helps become your advocate without being your advocate. It encourages you as the patient to be your own advocate. And it does this by allowing you to express your feelings. And this is the robot that we're building. Wow. In addition to this, there's a consultancy agency part, simply because I have this ability and I have this knowledge. And startups are kind of expensive. So until such a point that I have a working POC and I'm willing to go to investors with it, because I don't want to go before I have something I'm willing to throw my name behind, we're doing consultancy.
Cool. Interesting. Yeah, your sort of experience is interesting because the vast majority of people who have experience in designing conversational interactions or conversational user interfaces, 9 out of 10 of them, probably more than that, 99 out of 100 perhaps, is really it's chatbots and voice assistants and maybe it's a bit of search and, you know, that kind of stuff. And that all is entirely kind of relevant and obviously kind of brilliant. But I think that when you're designing for a thing that's in the room with you, unlike Alexa, which is also in the room with you, but it's just this inanimate object that sits there, a robot is that next level of interaction because you've got like an actual thing that can not presumably, but like perceptually it feels as though perhaps it's looking at you and it's paying attention to you sort of thing, rather than a light on the top of a hockey puck sort of thing. And it's a physical sort of presence. So presumably that changes. Does that change, in fact, how you approach design? Because you're not just designing conversations, are you?
No, it's a different sort of experience because it has to be multimodal, but the modality doesn't have to be a screen. The multimodality is lights, it's movements, it's gestures in space. One of the things that we know is that robots are more trusted immediately than voice bots, per se, because it's in your space. There have been research studies that show that two people having a conversation where a robot sits beside them, does nothing but looks at which speaker is talking, enhances the human to human communication. And so when you're designing that robot, you want to have it be there 24/7. So unlike a voice bot or chatbot, which you have to approach, this is going to be something that must be proactive. It's also something that needs to not take up so much conversational space. It needs to be there when it needs to, and it shouldn't be there when it shouldn't. And I know that that sounds really vague, but it takes on the perception of a completely different system because you're not calling to it. You're not asking it to solve a problem. It lives with you. It works with you. And this is specifically social companion robots, but if we're looking at robots in general, it's something that can approach you and can leave. And so the interaction is much more in the way that humans understand conversational interactions than just a phone call or a text.
So what did you say there? People tend to trust robots more than what? People or other conversational interfaces?
This is a very good question because certain studies will say that they trust them more than people. But these studies were before we got AI into the life of the general population regularly. So these studies that would say they trust them more than people initially is because they are seen in the sort of way that children are, naive. They're not out there to hurt you, just to do a task. Now, compared to chatbots and voice bots, their physical presence gives a little bit of an ease to a person because now they know that they can shut it off. They can walk away. They can just leave. And this helps to add to the trustworthiness of them. And a number of studies have been done on this, which is why I say it so confidently without needing to cite a source. But there is, and I think that this is a good segue, a certain level where it's not trustworthy. And this is where we enter the uncanny valley.
Very good segue. Brilliant segue. So the uncanny valley then. Well, firstly, I would have, my assumption would be that people would trust them less because they are kind of, you know, it's a bit like smart vehicles potentially, where like we know what the goal is. We know that they are kind of on the path to being able to achieve that goal. But would you jump inside a smart car and have it drive you 350 miles down a, 80-mile-an-hour motorway? There's a lot of people that kind of wouldn't. So before we get to the uncanny valley, is there something different about robots compared to other things like a smart car and stuff like that, where, I don't know whether people's trust is probably the same as from a smart car perspective. So like, yeah, and I know there's good evidence out there that, and other studies that have found that people feel more comfortable talking to a chatbot than a person in certain instances. Like there was a chatbot from like 2017, which was all around, it was for domestic abuse victims in India. And they found that the chatbot was perfect because nobody wants to make a phone call. And debt collection and stuff like that is another great example where people are a bit embarrassed, like I'm in debt, all kind of stuff. I don't really want to talk to someone about it, feel judged. So I can understand that from there. But from a robot perspective, where you've got this thing in your house that's like it's a thing that can move, it can look around, it can talk, like can it hack into my Wi-Fi, can it just turn my TV off, like I would have thought that the trustworthy wouldn't be quite as high. So it's interesting how it is in fact actually pretty trustworthy.
So it is an interesting one because again, the research studies that I've specifically looked at on this are from before OpenAI came out with ChatGPT.
Right, yeah.
So before most people understood a little bit more about AI and the capabilities of systems. But I do have special insight into cars
Mm.
because with Intuition Robotics, we did a couple of projects with big car manufacturers. Because as you know, or maybe you don't, when you are developing for cars, you develop like 5, 6, 10 years in the future. You make a lot of suggestions and ideas that may not be seen by anyone for 10 years.
Yeah.
So we worked with that. And one of the things that became very apparent when working with cars, smart cars specifically, is that people don't trust them. And they don't trust them because they don't understand the mechanisms of how it thinks, how it cognates, why is it making the choices it's making. So when you design the UX for something like that, you do need to express why it's making those choices. This is why AI agents in cars, or at least virtual agents, voice agents in cars, are exceptionally useful or will be in the future. Because when we have those smart cars making those decisions, the driver and the passengers want to be able to say, why are you doing this? Why have you chosen to stop? Why are you going faster? This is something that is really important. And having that AI agent helps you as the driver, you as the passenger, build that connection and build that personification of the car in such a way that you begin to trust it more. So that's specifically about cars. And as for robots, I think it's about form factor. For instance, if you have a dog, which you do, they're not human. They don't look human. They don't think human. They don't act human. Sometimes they do, but that could be just a personification. You anthropomorphize your dog as if they were a person. But we still have that trust level because we've created this idea of how they think. And for robots, the form factor matters because it helps us understand how they think. The Boston Dynamics dog is still considered creepy to many people because it's hard to understand what it's thinking. This is why one of the really great benefits of creating a robot that has a head that tilts like this is that you can show thought. When it just tilts to the side just a little bit, it's like, oh, it's thinking. Because you now have that human motion, you now understand what it's doing and you trust it a little bit more because it's taking steps into that anthropomorphized area of our brain.
Interesting. Yeah. With a robot dog, I would think that the robot dog is just thinking like a dog and then it's a bit daft. But the reality is that robot dogs are probably a hell of a lot smarter than I am.
At least they're good at making connections.
Yeah. So, Uncanny Valley then. So, for those people who've worked in the sort of AI space for a while, or even not so much, not so much of a while, you'll be familiar with Uncanny Valley. What I wanted to do here is to pretend that I am somebody who has no idea about anything related to AI. I am a grandparent or something like that who is coming into this for the first time, and let's go through what is the Uncanny Valley to somebody who is not in the AI industry.
Okay, so let's start from when it was created, which was 1978 by a Japanese professor and roboticist, M. Mori. He said, and this is his translated words, they may not be exactly accurate, but in his paper he wrote, I have noticed that in climbing towards the goal of making robots appear human, our affinity for them increases until we come to a valley, which I call the uncanny valley. What he was basically saying here was as we start making systems more and more human, we start feeling more like they are human. We feel more connected to them. And when you get to things like humanoid robots, it starts going up and up, and you're like, oh, yeah, I feel very connected to this. But at one point, it drops. And we can actually see this across moving systems as well as non-moving systems. And so what we also find in the uncanny valley is something like corpses. This is something I know. This is that Sarah. We don't see corpses a lot. We're not used to them, and so to us, they're like human but not, and it's weird. And so he would put that there as well. And then once you cross the uncanny valley, it goes back up. So you have prosthetic limbs. Prosthetic limbs appear on both sides of the valley, still in the deep part of it, because sometimes they look almost like feet or arms, but they're just not. And it gives us a little bit of an eerie feeling. A good example in pop culture, if you remember Beowulf with Angelina Jolie, her character was CGI'd all get up. And a lot of people felt that she was scarier than Grendel because of that. They felt that weird sort of ew feeling. Now, while it is a bit cultural to say we find corpses to be uncanny because we never see them, and other cultures will live with their dead for a while until the soul fully leaves, and so their uncanny valley would be different. There are a couple of reasons why we might say the uncanny valley exists, and people have worked for years to try to sort of prove this. Now, I'm going to caveat this. Maury was writing this as a theory. There was no proof of what he was saying, but he wrote it as a theory about robots, very, very specifically about robots. Now, people have then gone and said, hey, I'm going to start proving this. I'm going to say why you're right because I believe that you're right. And yeah, let's do that. So some of the hypotheses regarding the uncanny valley are that we have it because of pathogen avoidance. Due to the imperfections of how the robot would look, we kind of perceive it as if it was a carrier of illness. And so that's where the uncanny would be. That's theory one. Theory two, it reminds us of our own mortality, so mortality salience. We essentially see it as non-human and not alive, or as human and not alive, and so it reminds us that we ourselves will die. I'm less of a fan of this theory, but it has a lot of support behind it. There's evolutionary aesthetics. So different physical attributes indicate that a person is fit or ill, they're fertile or healthy or not, and also attractiveness. As things become more attractive to us, we're like, oh, I like that more. And when they're not attractive to us because we feel like something's wrong, they go, oh, don't know what that was. And that's the uncanny valley. There's the violation of expectations. And this is one that I think is really good for voice user experiences, because the idea that the uncanny valley exists because it doesn't match what we expect to see is something we can bring into this design sphere. And it's basically the realization of something being artificial, even though it seems like it shouldn't be. And then there's the categorical uncertainty, the feeling of uncanniness that emerges when we're not sure where it fits categorically, which is a good one as well. I do tend to veer towards this. And then there's the perception of mind. So it's the difference between robots and humans that doesn't just lie in the physical appearance, but in how people perceive them. And this goes back to the trust thing we were talking about, how once they can figure out how it thinks, they feel more trusting of it. And that's essentially the theories of the uncanny valley, broken down into 6 different groups. But I do want to point out that it is very much based on culture, what is uncanny and what is not. It's based on age. Kids below the age of 9 in certain studies found that there was no uncanny valley. And they liked when a robot might think for itself, and they don't know how it's going to think. But kids above the age of 9 were completely different. We saw that oldest groups who were tested for the uncanny valley, again for robots, don't seem to have such an they like that the robot might think and they don't have to do that. They like that it's a companion that sits there. And we also saw that children with autism typically don't have a specific valley for robots. They do have it for things in general, and that includes people, but it's not specific to robots. And so these are some things to keep in mind when you talk about the uncanny valley, and I do think that it's really important that we do keep those in mind.
So people talk about crossing the uncanny valley, and so yes. In that instance, are we saying then that there is a point at which something is human-like, I suppose, because but we understand that it's not human because this is quite clearly a robot, and it looks like a robot, talks like a robot. We're in no danger of this being kind of something that's a bit sort of freaky. And then perhaps if it gets a bit too realistic, then we're like, oh, whoa, hold on, this is a bit crazy. Like, what's going on here? And then coming out of the other side of that, if you had something that was human-like and passable as human, so to speak, then perhaps you're at the other end of the uncanny valley. Is that a right way of understanding it?
It is, and because we're getting closer and closer to that, where we're getting robots that have more human-like movements, more technologies that are better capable of mimicking humans. There's good technology out that mimics the feel of human skin,
Wow.
and we're crossing over it. So there is a theory that there is a new uncanny valley that comes after it becomes perfectly human looking, that is, post-human, but we haven't been able to prove this in any way because we haven't fully taken robots to that level. However, and this is the really important one that I want to talk about, digital humans are a good example of two sides of the uncanny valley, because digital humans exist on the first swoop down, and metahumans appear on the other side. So they're still a little bit uncanny, but more familiar. And so this is research that has been done a couple of times now. I believe the earliest one that was done, and I talked about this in my presentation, was done on 2001 with something called digital mic. So they basically took something that had low human likeness and talked with the humanish voice, and then they had something that was digital human, and then they had a metahuman. Now, if you haven't searched metahuman before, do so. It's very, very interesting. And this is where my theory that the uncanny valley now only exists because of bad CGI and design choice comes from. Because these metahumans, we saw people seeing more affinity with them. I don't have this uncanny valley. It feels like I'm talking to a digital version of Mike, as opposed to a digital representation of what Mike should be. And this research comes from Seymour, Mike, Yuan, Leong, and Dennis Allen and Remer K from 2021. Have we crossed the uncanny valley? Understanding affinity, trustworthiness, and the preference for realistic digital humans in immersive environments, from the Journal of the Association for Information Systems. And I think that I want you to understand that that's where it's from, anyone listening, so that you can look it up yourself. It's very, very interesting. And it's from 3 years ago.
Right. So what's the difference then between a digital human and a metahuman, as you describe it?
So I think a really good example to look at is Unique, and how they have described how they create digital humans. One of the things that they mention is that they design it to not be quite human, to have movements that are not quite a pure copy.
Mm-hmm.
And they do this intentionally, so they don't trick anybody seeing this representation as if it was a person. And a metahuman, this is exactly what it is.
Right.
A metahuman would actually go into that realm of fully copying. And this is what I would describe as the difference, though there are better explanations out there. Where I learned this and got this definition from was about 100 pages. So,
so this is one from Unreal Engine. So would you class that seemingly as a metahuman?
I would say this is still a digital human.
Oh, would you?
I would, because I would say a metahuman would have more, how do I say, facial definitions that match ours, like asymmetry in the face and pimples, even something that would match it to a human level, so that you could say, oh, that's a picture of someone.
Okay. How about this one then?
This one looks much more like a metahuman, but I would still say, for me, I think that this is still in the digital human realm. I think that it's a sliding scale at the moment. But if you look up very specifically meta humans versus digital humans, you'll see, there's videos of them side by side,
Right.
that even the subtle movements of the muscles underneath the face, which are being defined, make it seem like you're talking to a person.
Interesting. And so do you think that then is there an uncanny valley? Well, I've got a few questions about crossing that still, but do you think there's an uncanny valley, or is there an uncanny valley when it comes to not necessarily things that look human, but things that perhaps either sound human or use the same language? I'm thinking about, the voice assistants, or when you call a contact center, or when you interact with AI in another way, like in a chat bot or something like that. Does the same thing still apply, or do we have to have some physical presence where we have to be able to be convinced that it is an actual human physical thing?
So I think that this one is really interesting because it comes down to trickery. If you remember one of the things that I said earlier, that the violation of expectations is where we find an uncanny valley. We see this a little bit when we talk about voice or chatbot. Now, a lot of the studies for voice and uncanny valley conflate visuals and voice. They don't just do it on a phone call. They do it with some type of face as well, which is obviously going to cause an uncanny valley. We know that that exists. But with humans, what we find with voice is that there's a distinction between synthetic, organic, and then organic but unhealthy. So pathogenic is what they call it. An example here that I can give is that we did a test in 2023 on cat voices, real cat voices, and then synthetically changed cat voices. And humans could tell the difference in a statistically significant manner between a human voice, I'm saying human, cat voice, and a synthetic cat voice. And so they then took this and they said, okay, let's run it on similar things with TTS. Let's use IBM Watson. And what they actually found was that the voice was so good that humans often mistook it for being organic. And this was really interesting because while it did provide that there was some ambiguity, it didn't actually affect likability or canniness. However, when they used a sick human's voice, they found that human pathological voices got into something that could be seen as the uncanny valley. So with specific to voice, I think that it has to do with, are you tricking people? And if you trick people, you will throw them into an uncanny valley that doesn't exist just for the voice sounds alone. And that's because of the expectation that was violated. And then when we go into chatbot, which is really interesting, you've probably read this multiple times this year, chatbots overcoming the Turing test, people not being able to tell a difference. This is where we're looking at. And we're not saying that hallucinations are the uncanny valley, because those can definitely kick you out of the experience and you're like, oh, it's a chatbot, it doesn't know what it's saying.
Yeah.
But that's not uncanny valley. Uncanny valley is the sort of the feeling that you get when you look at something and you're like, I don't know if I trust that. It's your dog wakes you up in the middle of the night and you look up and all you see is a giant maw over your face and you think, holy shoot, I've made a mistake bringing this into my house. That's the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is not, it's bad.
Yeah.
And so when we actually look at chats, we see that while they'll pass Turing tests 54% of the time, humans only pass the Turing test 67% of the time. And it's fairly standard. One study said ChatGPT-4 exhibits behavioral and personality traits that are indistinguishable from a random human from tens of thousands of human subjects from more than 50 countries. So what we see is the uncanny valley, and what we should be talking about when we talk about it for our design field is very specifically violating expectations.
Right.
And failures to keep up expectations, I guess.
So would an example of in the chat modality, the uncanny valley, being something like not necessarily, as you said, the hallucinations. All that stuff seems to be like pre-uncanny valley. That's the stuff that will kick it out of the uncanny valley
Yeah.
further towards you and be like, okay, that's obviously a chatbot. But how about something like, you know how some people say that like your phone's listening to you? And all of a sudden, I was talking about cream cabbage the other day, and all of a sudden, I log online, I'm getting recipes for cream cabbage. How strange is that? You know, like, how true that is or not, who cares? But like an example could be perhaps that you engage in a conversation with a chatbot of some description, and it just so happens to know something about you that you just did not think it would or could. Not as simple as, oh, hi, Falene, you want to talk about your flight that you've just booked? Because that's obvious. But maybe something like, do you need a seat for Gilgamesh? You know, that might be a bit creepy if you've never done that before with them. So would that be an example in that sort of channel or no?
So I'm not sure if that would be exactly uncanny valley, because that's not something that a human would do. So it doesn't quite go in the same direction. Do I believe that it is very creepy and creates its own unique system of what knowledge is out there for me? Yes. I think that is interesting and problematic. For instance, we started this with you talking about my backgrounds found on ChatGPT, yeah?
Yeah.
How did it get that information? Did I put that out there? This goes into the security and how safe we feel online to post things. But I do think that is also in the same realm of sort of the hallucinations. They're not quite on the uncanny valley, but they do impact our experiences. I think a really good example of the uncanny valley, or a good statement of it, because it is so unique, and maybe what I think is, oh God, I put that on the internet, somebody else would be like, how does it know? Is a quote from Lordy and Gittin from 2011, which is, the judgment of human likeness lies in the eyes of the judge himself. Are you expecting it to have this information? Do you understand how it works? Would that become uncanny valley for us? I think that it's an interesting one when it comes to chat, because the form factor of chat is that it's connected to the internet. And so we kind of expect, especially after OpenAI created this whole ecosystem of GPTs, where you can have it know things from the internet, that it should know. And I think a better example of a failure, or of maybe an uncanny valley, is you go to the form factor, you go to your computer, you start typing, you ask a question, and it has no idea because you expect it to. I'm not saying that this is exactly uncanny valley. I would say, on my second favorite topic, this is breaking secondary belief in a system. Hello, Tolkien fans, I'm here for you. Because you created a system where you assumed that this would exist, a world, the form factor in which it would be connected to the internet and it would know things. And people create these assumptions in the secondary world that should match the primary world, and suddenly they don't exist. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's uncanny valley.
Interesting. What did you say there? Second belief in a system.
So Tolkien, my favorite topic, Tolkien had this way of building fantasy worlds, which he said there's the primary world, the world you currently exist in, and then there's the secondary world, the world in which the fantasy exists. And instead of suspending your disbelief like you would when you look at an art piece and you go, well, that's not real, he wants to invite you in by creating this secondary belief where a world is so consistent in its design that you are kind of just led into a belief that you fully believe. Of course, there will be gods on Earth. I've created this system with Iluvatar. This is what you need. And of course, there's going to be a history of wars and conflicts. Because even if he doesn't fully write it, he creates it close enough to something you might already understand to believe. Now, when it comes to chatbots and voice bots even, if you create a system that someone should believe and then it breaks, this moves them out of that world. It breaks their secondary belief, so they no longer trust the system. A really good research paper that was done on this that I actually presented, I didn't do, presented with my presentation, was one that was done in 2018. And it said that the more the chatbot is perceived as inhuman or weird, the more it is disliked. But on the contrary, if you have strong negative correlations between the uncanny valley factor and the dimensions of competence, people would perceive the chatbot as inhuman and less competent in general, which is part of the whole system. They see it can't do a thing. Well, it's a chatbot, of course, I'll just exist within that. So it's not quite itself uncanny valley. And they also saw that if something was perceived as human, even if it was a chatbot, in this secondary world that was created by this interaction, people trusted it more. They had more affinity for it. They liked it more because it was just simply human. And then once it found out that it was a chatbot, they immediately went, no, don't like it, don't like the experience, everything is bad. And this is the breaking of expectations, the violation of expectations that we find as a theory for the uncanny valley. So while it breaks the secondary world belief, sometimes it also breaks the experience and violates your experience, leading into the uncanny valley.
Interesting. We've got some comments here. Andrew Francis, his personal experience with digital humans, etc., is that the hand movements when talking weren't quite right. And Trevor also agrees and seems as though it seems quite fake. Would you recommend as a designer you've got a lot of experience working on physical things that are in the room with you, where you do need to develop a certain level of trust? I would probably say that perhaps a robot that's quite obviously a robot doesn't dip into the uncanny valley. But in the voice channel we've spoke about chat as well, and even also companies working on robotics, OpenAI, Tesla, they're all working on these robots. Is it a good idea? Should we be attempting to cross the uncanny valley? Should we be aiming to create things that are pass-offable as human to cross the uncanny valley? Or do you think it's best practice for designers to always stay slightly clear of that?
So this question demands you talk about your business goals. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to prove? For instance, if you want to create an experience that is seamless, that people will like and trust, and I'm not saying that you should necessarily do this because technological ethics suggests that you don't trick people. You would make something that fully crosses it. Pretend that it's human, pretend that it works, because your business goal is not the chat or the experience itself, it is the interaction. And we know that people will trust the human interaction a little bit better. Now, when it comes to something like a digital human, what do you do? What do you show? Again, what's your business goal? If your business goal is to replace people in meetings like this, so this persona of me physically is not a human, then cross it, because that's what your goal is. And as a designer, you need to know the business goal of your company. That being said, you can look at Unique as an example. Their goal is not to cross the uncanny valley. They don't want to. They don't need to. What they're creating is good enough that it fills an experiential need without crossing the uncanny valley. And so this is where I think that it really sits, especially with, let's say, hand gestures, which really kill an experience and drop it down. Most people don't use their hands. You're talking to a Jewish woman. I talk like this. But most people don't use their hands in Zoom meetings. They keep them down. And so you can very easily avoid that. And you can make design choices that fit your needs without ever trying to fall into it. And I think that, again, business logic, business decisions.
I saw a podcast with, I can't remember the guy's name now. I don't think it was the CEO of Zoom. Although it may well have been, was it? I'm just looking online now trying to find it. Anyway, it was it Eric? I don't think it was Eric Wan. It was somebody fairly senior at Zoom anyway, and he was talking about how what they see the future being is that what their goal is that they don't really want people to be in meetings. And in fact, what they really want is for digital humans to be in the meetings, armed with an agenda from the human. And it turns up at the meeting to, sit the meeting, get, share the information it needs to share, gather the actions it needs to action, and then sort of crack on. So it's according to Zoom, one potential future is that, digital versions of you will be in this meeting, maybe even having this podcast discussion with me without you even being here, because it's been trained on all of your knowledge that you've given it over time, etc. Do we need to cross the uncanny valley for things like that? Like, I don't know whether I'm struggling to find a situation where we would need to cross the uncanny valley. Like, what would be the difference from either an experience perspective or otherwise when you have something that is quite obviously a digital human versus something that we just can't tell?
So this is a really good question. And actually what you're talking about, Lee Milan wrote a book, I think we've talked about it before, about dynamic knowledge rendering. What Zoom is talking about and what he talks about is exactly the same thing, where you would have agents communicate without you, but with you filling it with the information. So your information becomes the interaction ability of the system, as opposed to you yourself being that mode of transit. But when it comes to crossing it and should we or should we not, I think that the working with robots, you want to understand it because you want to know where your system lies. Lingua Robotica's robot will not cross the uncanny valley because it doesn't need to. It needs to look like a toy. It needs to look like something. It needs to look like a dog. A system that exists that is not quite human and doesn't need to be human, even though it will communicate in such a way. And we need to create the expectations that it will be able to communicate. So it has to have some type of form factor that would be able to talk. And those are the things that you need to consider. Not necessarily how human it is, but how many human features can it have before it falls into the uncanny valley. The only other case that I see as being fully necessary to cross the uncanny valley would be things like, and excuse my language on this family-friendly podcast, sex robots.
Right.
That's where you want to see crossing the uncanny valley fully. And any type of VR experience where you are represented by something and you want it to look human and you want to be fully immersed. Because if you're going to go into a system and you're going to say, hey, we're creating this Chinese lore game where you can be any person, any gender, any skin color, hair color, whatever you want. And you get to walk in and experience and play, and the voice sounds like that. You want your interactions with NPCs to feel as real as you feel. So this is an example of Ready Player One. If any of you have seen the movie or read the book, essentially what it is you want the experience that you're giving out and you're showing to be what you expect to receive. And this is the only time where you think, maybe we should cross the uncanny valley for this. One of the things that's really interesting, and I think that the best use of the uncanny valley or the crossing of it is game design, is that game designers will specifically force characters into the uncanny valley. And they'll specifically create it so that it's just weird enough. A good example of this is Resident Evil, which if any of you have been following that since for years ago.
Classic.
It's amazing. They have an entire animated movie series where you get the characters and their hair looks just somewhat fake, but sometimes it's so real. But then you get into the zombies themselves or T-virus infected individuals, and they are specifically falling into the uncanny valley. So you can fully feel like it's almost human all the way until zombies. And they do that on purpose. And so I think that when it comes to us for crossing it, it's a design choice on what we need to do, because I fully believe that the Resident Evil system, because it's not just a movie, and it's not just a game, it's a whole thing, umbrella, corporation. And It can cross the uncanny valley, and I think that people would not necessarily know. I think that the problem with crossing it is very obvious. It affects people's jobs, people's livelihoods, their own voices. Look at Scarlett Johansson when it comes to voice. Do we want to mimic that? Do we want people to no longer be able to be voice actors? The benefit of it is that we create better systems. The problem is we ruin people's livelihoods. It has a lot of ethical considerations, but I think that that's more of an ethical consideration. And should we, if we can, then why?
Yeah, yeah. Let's go back to the bit that was piquing everybody's interest, which is these sex robots. I'm joking.
It always does. It's a good one.
Yeah. No, but there is an ethical consideration here. In the case of the sex robot, people are obviously if they do buy those, if they do exist in future, then that would be obviously a conscious choice to purchase something that you know for a fact isn't real, but you purchase it under that pretense, or under that premise. There is highly likely to be situations where you are in the world encountering robots, not necessarily sex robots, but robots, that have crossed the uncanny valley. Whether that's making a phone call, whether that's actually being somewhere, like you walk into your bank and all of a sudden the thing behind the desk is not a person, but you think it is. So there's the other ethical consideration. The bigger ethical consideration is the one that you mentioned, which is, is it ethical to build these things for certain use cases and then displace jobs or replace people or whatever. But there's another one which is just from an interaction standpoint, going back to the sort of design best practice. One of the things that one group of people will say is that you should always declare yourself to be not real. Whereas another group of people will say, well, that doesn't really matter really. Like, we'll record all of our phone voices and we'll just pass it off as a human. And if people believe it's a human, then so what? So where do you stand on that? When it comes to this uncanny valley discussion, do you think that ethically that we should be, upfront and saying, hey, I'm not real, by the way. I might look real, but I'm not real. Or do you think that it's use case dependent and it's quite feasible just to kind of, crack on and not declare this kind of stuff?
So this is an interesting question, and I've thought about it a lot because the basic rule of thought with ethical technological design and creation in general is that you must not fool a human. You must not try to be anything but the technology that you are. And I think that this is a fairly good rule, but I think that it's an old rule that is going to be taken over by advancements and by the very fact that people don't want to interact with robots. They want to interact with people. And companies don't want to hire people because it's entirely possible that instead of having conversation designers that build bots, you have conversation designers that build scripts for humans who will then just copy paste based on whatever the response they get. It's the direction that we're trying to go, which is to ease the burden on people by creating these algorithms and these systems that people don't have to do those. This will displace jobs. It has displaced jobs. People aren't going to be working in their fields for very long, especially I believe banking is likely going to be heavily impacted by LLMs and the development of AIs. So personally, my thought is, as someone who is starting my own company, the cost of hiring people is extensive. It is very, very difficult. But I would still try to avoid tricking people. I work with robots, and the robots that I work with are not human, and they are specifically designed in a form factor where I will never need to tell you that I'm not a human because I don't look human. As for the Mr. Universe bot from Firefly or the humans, androids from Humans, and all of those other series, it becomes a question of how are we trying to put these things forward. And I think that because they are not human, because they don't think like humans, it is really important that people understand that they're interacting with things that are not humans. And caveat, because there's always a caveat, you don't ruin the experience by continuously reminding people that you are not human. You need to come up with something that reminds them in a good, clever way that is not, I'm sorry, I don't understand emotions because I'm not a human. For a robot that also is supposed to work with people to help them fight loneliness.
Yeah.
Because you can't fight loneliness unless you're there emotionally.
Yeah. And you
can't
understand the
say-
emotions that the other's feeling.
Exactly. And if you ever say the line, I understand how you feel, and then you say a follow-up is I fail, I don't have any emotions. You've lied. You've tricked the person, the individual, which means that you've already broken the AI ethics, the technology ethics systems of not tricking people. And so you need to understand what you're trying to do. And if you can't tell them through voice, then you tell them through words. And if you can't tell them through voice or words, you tell them through form factor. And I think that chatbots have this in a really good factor because all they need to do is they need to say at the beginning, hi, I'm a bot.
Yeah.
And then they have an icon that looks not human and they're good to go. Voice bots are a little bit harder, but I think that as long as the experience is both geared towards the person. So for instance, I need you to say A, B, C, D, so I understand your voice. We're going to understand that's not a person. People don't care about that. So you can design it without specifically saying that you're a bot, but you have to design it knowing that you're not going to say it and you're also not tricking. So it's a little in between.
Interesting. So we've spoken a lot, well, towards the back end of the conversation about, you know, AI replacing jobs and stuff like that. And I think that there's definitely a, I mean, Gartner and read what you want, and everyone will kind of, who's been doing these studies, I read one from Goldman Sachs and McKinsey, and everyone's kind of been doing these studies, which is that there is a high degree of potential that AI in its current form factor, forget robots, just as it currently is, large language models, generative AI, has the potential to, you know, severely disrupt the job market as far as sales, marketing, software development, research and development, customer service operations, stuff like that. And so there's already, from a kind of labour market perspective, this kind of risk, if you want to call it that. I also see the other side of it, which is that actually businesses can scale a lot more effectively, pay people a lot better, put people in jobs that they prefer to be doing, etc. From the sort of like, you know, physical robot perspective, how far away are we, do you think? I mean, we've seen Tesla's robots, we've seen OpenAI's examples, we've seen Sophia. Those are still short of the uncanny valley. They're very obviously robots, you know, that look to be more or less kind of like, not specifically task-based in the case of Sophia, because that's not, but in Tesla and Tesla's case specifically, you'd expect that it's going to be in the factory, working on the factory floor, stuff like that. So, but how far away do you think we are in terms of the technology we have today? You mentioned materials that have got skin sensitivity and all that kind of stuff. Like, how far away are we realistically from having a robot on the street that has crossed the uncanny valley?
So this is really interesting. Going back to sex robots, there are some that are really advanced that fully look human. The issue is their movements when it comes to things like walking. They're not trained for that. That's not their job. But they do have the visualization as humans. Now, these robots will cost you closer to like $500,000 because the $10,000 and $20,000 ones, I did this for research on what the technology looks like, guys. Be aware, I have not spent my money on these. But they're actually quite accurate because you get an artist to go down and to paint every detail. The differences in the skin color, the multi-layers, the skin texture is actually quite good. So we have stuff that looks human. Now, I recently read an article by a Chinese robotics, like human robotics developer, saying that they're hoping to cross the uncanny valley by the end of 2024, which is possible. There's a really cool Israeli company that my friend Itai Perez used to work for. He built this system called Menti. It's called Menti. Look it up. It's very good. basically you train a robot that has arms and legs and kind of a head to do a task. So you teach it how to fold laundry, or you teach it how to deliver coffee or deliver medication. And this starts to cross the uncanny valley because it's not human. It's not trying to look human. And you have to understand the uncanny valley exists because you're trying to be human. An industrial robot never falls into the uncanny valley because it's not human and it doesn't try to be human. So when you create a robot that looks like a robot and it does human things and speaks with a human voice, it's not in the uncanny valley because it's still a robot, and very clearly a robot. And I do think that we aren't far away from having the technology. We have the technology that the robots could just walk down the streets. The trick is investments. It is difficult to get investments for robotics companies because you have to prove a worth and prove a value, and you have to prove that it's better than a person doing a system. So industrial robots, good. They exist. They're replacing jobs. I'm not saying that's good. They already exist. They're already there.
Yeah.
When it comes to the more human-looking ones, what's the point in having a human robot? Now, Menti created one because it said it should be able to do the tasks that you need to do with hands and legs. And so therefore it needs to fit into a human environment. But now prove to me that you need a robot that looks like one of those really high-end sex robots, but that walks around on feet. And you can't prove that business-wise at the moment. Even creating a robot designed to help teach English to children, in places where there isn't an English teacher. So it would be very good for migrant children or children who are, unfortunately, in the United States, detained away from their parents, but still need an education. Having something like that would be really useful. It's still difficult to prove its use because people would prefer people. And so you have to show that there is a gap. You have to show that this fills the gap, and you have to show that it is not going to replace a person, because this is something that is on everybody's minds.
That's really
so
interesting.
I think that technologically close, socially, 10 years.
Yeah, because if the job doesn't require a human, then why would it require a human-like thing? I suppose is the question, isn't it? Like, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It very much doesn't. It's like the robot dog can deliver drinks.
Yeah.
So why would you use a human on like a biped system when the robot dog could do it, and it has a full tray and it's likely not going to fall?
Yeah, it's got 4 legs. The advantage of dogs. It's crazy that the technology is pretty much there to create some superhuman looking like robot that can cross the uncanny valley, and the best we've got for it is sex robots. It's crazy, isn't it?
Well, these are the people who are investing in it because they found a niche, and there are a couple companies. I believe that the UK actually has the best producer of more human-like ones, but they do exist also in San Francisco and in China. And they're just harder to find because their clientele needs to be spending close to $500,000, if not more, dollars.
My God, that is mental. I'd love to search for it and show people what they look like, but I don't want to be targeted with ads full of these robots.
And you will be.
I know, I probably will be. I will be now I've spoken about it, if the rumours are true. My wife will be like, what have you been looking at? But yeah, that's mad. That's mad. But Falene, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation, as I knew it would. Long overdue. We should have done this a long time ago, and you're welcome back at any time. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people go to learn about your company and the work you're doing, and follow you and all that kind of stuff?
So we do have a LinkedIn page, Lingua Robotica. You can just search it. It's the one that pops up. We are currently working on our website to try to create it much more interesting, but you can email us if you want any collabs or to have conversations at hello@lingua-robotica.com. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, and I can connect you to myself and my company, One Woman Show. It's Falene McKenna, Falene space McKenna.
Perfect. We will put those links on the show notes and on the website and all that kind of stuff. And thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. Your talk at Umpires was fantastic, and so I'm glad we managed to do this. And thank you for doing Umpires as well, because it was brilliant. Great to see you, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
It was fabulous to be both on the podcast and to present at Unparsed. I look forward to next year at Unparsed.
Yes.
I look forward to anyone who wants to talk about next year in Unparsed with me as well, because that'll be a fun conversation.
Nice one. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you all for tuning in. We have another podcast coming next week with another Unparsed attendee, Cooper from Gridspace. So that's going to be epic. Wicked. All right. Nice one. Thanks so much.